Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. For the respect of some foreign guests with us, I will conduct the lecture in English, but I have to start with an Arabic statement. أنا في حالة من الفرح الشديد والتواضع أن يتم دعوتي في هذا المؤتمر، وأنا البحرين تمثل لي فترة من أجمل فترات حياتي. عشت في هذه البلد الطيبة وتفاعلت مع مجتمعها الراقي، وعندي ذكريات بديعة في هذه البلد، ولا أحمل للبحرين إلا كل الحب. وأشكركم على التعامل الراقي والعطوف الذي شعرت به أنا وعائلتي طوال سنوات إقامتي. سنوات كانت محملة بذكريات رائعة تعلمت فيها كثيرا، ووفقني الله أن يكون لدي طلبة وطالبات يحققوا فكرة أن الطالب والطالبة يمكن أن يعلموا الأستاذ ويلهموا الأستاذ، وهذا تحقق لي تحقق كامل بحظي السعيد بمجموعة من الطلبة والطالبات الذين انبهرت بوجودهم، والآن هم أساتذة ودكاترة ومؤثرين تأثير كبير في الحركة المعمارية والعمرانية والتصميمية في البحرين. ومنهم أختي وبنتي، مش عايز أعمل إن أنا كبير في السن، الدكتورة مي، التي أتشرف كل الشرف بأنها دعتني لهذه الجلسة الرائعة. في معظم محاضراتي أنا أميل إلى فكرة أن أكون مواجه confrontational، وهذه المحاضرة لن تخرج أيضا من هذا السياق. المحاضرة كما تروا حضراتكم بتطرح تساؤل له علاقة ب why creativity is resisted. We have a tendency towards resisting creative endeavors, creating ideas, new innovations, and so on. So the lecture will be divided in two main parts. The first part, I will question the notion of creativity, and I would argue that creativity is not an option. It's inevitable. It's a way of life. And particularly in the paradigm that we're living in now, creativity is the answer for the future. And then in the second part of the lecture, I will narrate the story of three main projects. The three projects, architects, educators, and critics make fun of the three projects. But I will elaborate a different story regarding how you can look to the same projects with a fresh angle from a different perspective, and therefore you would reach a radically different conclusion. So I want to start with the two C's that are fundamentally important in my career and my knowledge. And the first one is criticism. I did my master's degree about architecture and urban criticism and how criticism is fundamentally important in understanding and analyzing the built environment. And while doing that, I realized that also criticism and creativity are the two sides of the main coin. We have to understand also the creative process, how architects and urban designers and interior designers can come up with new ideas. And this is why I moved to studying a deep study of creativity in my PhD. So those two C's are fundamentally important, and they are so connected, criticism and creativity. 40 years ago, a book was published, and it was a turning point in the way we understand the importance of innovation and creativity. And even the title of the book was telling the whole story: Innovate or Evaporate. And this is exactly the right slogan that we should aspire for. Creativity and innovation, it's not an optional, but it's a way of life, it's a way of thinking, and it's a way by which, as Professor Al-Hawash said, to move from being consumers to being producers. And we are in the knowledge and the creative economy, where the meaning of production is becoming different than the 50s and the 60s, where we were used to produce actual products. We are in a paradigm now where we are producing ideas and concepts. I am also so much interested in how we interpret the notion of identity, and how we usually, when we talk about identity, we resort to the past, as if our identity is frozen in time. When we talk about how architecture and how interior design and how urbanism should respect our identity, we will bring pictures from the past. Old Muharraq, old Manama, old Doha, old Kuwait. How about now? And why all of these new buildings are not contributing to our identity? Why we are not considering identity as a dynamic process, as a dynamic concept. And therefore, Muharraq is important, Old Manama is important, but the World Trade Center also is important. So the new buildings and the new interventions are unique contributions to the notion of dynamic identity as a frozen identity. There's a huge changes happening in the world. And a lot of excellent thinkers and writers are tackling those issues. One of which is that we are witnessing now an age where there's a new class, a new anatomy in the social groups called the creative class. The creative class are the people who their capital is not in the bank, it's in their brains, in their minds. They have the ability to think, they have the ability to innovate, they have the ability to create, and therefore, they redefine the concept of geography. They are not attached to places like our grandfathers and grandmothers who were born, educated, get married, had children, and died in the same place. This is a different kind of geography. They moved around the world under condition that they are subscribing to the environment that would nurture their creativity, that would keep them inspired. And therefore, this is the excellent work of Richard Florida, who alerted us to these kind of fundamental changes. We are also in a different kind of economy. I mean, look at Silicon Valley. Look at Silicon Valley in India, Bangalore. Billions and billions and billions of dollars coming from this economy, which is basically based on knowledge and creative economy. It's not about oil anymore. We need to be prepared for the post-oil paradigm. It's not about even industry anymore. It's about knowledge, who is holding knowledge, and who is having the capacity to produce new ideas and new concepts. My dear friend, Charles Landry, he's a wonderful man. I just met him, last time I met him was last year, and we had a wonderful discussion. He is the one who invented the concept of the creative city, Al-Madina Al-Mubda'a. And his thesis was based on, well, wait a minute, all our approaches to cities are based on a very pragmatic approach. We look at the built environment from a very pragmatic approach. Industrial area, residential area, network of roads, and so on and so forth. But these are not cities. These are not places that would speak to the heart of people. We need to have a place for heritage, for art, for music, how the city can inspire people. And in my last discussion with him, I was talking with him about the beauty of Gulf cities and Islamic cities, and how while walking in a street, you can be inspired, you can be moved. You cannot have this in the streets of New York. You cannot have this in the streets of Chicago. But if you have a place where it was intimate, where the relation between people and places are so articulated in a way that speaks to your heart and your mind, then you can be inspired. Now, another important thing, again related to creativity, which is the notion of star architects and how it's our position towards star architects. And this is related to the second part of my lecture. We have a tendency, particularly in the schools of design and architecture and urbanism, is to give these guys a hard time, without knowing that those are not representation of everyday architecture. We need radically to differentiate between star architects who are designing iconic buildings built for the branding of a city, the branding of a country. I mean, look at Opera Sydney and John Otson. You cannot say we cannot build like this Opera Sydney all over the place. Absolutely, you cannot. But the reason that the Opera Sydney was built by and designed by John Otson as such, that part of his design mission is to design a brand for the country and for the city. But also there's another important element in this matrix, which is where is the local voice? Why sometimes we surrender to those star architects? I had a wonderful discussion with Zaha Hadid, Allah yarhamha. And she was telling me, I am amazed. Wherever I go in the Gulf, they listen to me. Nobody's questioning me at all. Whatever I would say, they will say, Alhamdulillah. She told me one time, I'm not going to mention the country, but they took me on a helicopter on top of the city. And they told me, please select the site. And then she asked, site for what? And the answer was, it doesn't matter. Just select a site and do a project. We need Zaha Hadid there, right? Well, this is fine. But all what I'm saying is that I will share with you some experiences where the same star architects, when they start to listen to the local voices, they will come up with even much better ideas. Because whatever knowledge and talent and creativity they have, they are not aware of what's happening in Muharraq. They are not aware of the meaning of balalit. They are not aware of the kebab, and so on and so forth. First project, designed by Rem Koolhaas, the library. And before talking about the library, I need also to share with you that there's a huge change in the concept of the library. The head of the British Library, one of the top libraries in the world, wrote an essay in The Guardian. And the title of the essay was, Eat, Drink, Laugh, You Are in the Library. How about that? Eat, drink, and laugh, you are in the library. Those are considered the crimes. If you go to any library and you eat or drink or laugh, you will have a tough time. But he was marketing a new revolution in the meaning of the library. In the digital age, if you have your iPad or your Kindle, why go to the library? Going to the library is irrelevant. So without having something new in the library that would attract the community, you cannot have a library as a destination anymore. And hence, when people, professors, critics saw the Qatar National Library, they said, well, this is a rectangular and something heavy dropped on top of it. Well, this is an interesting interpretation. But when you start to realize the local dialogue that I'm talking about and the different design workshops that we conducted with Rem Koolhaas, and one of the main pillars for those workshops was, we don't go to the libraries in the Middle East. If a friend of you would tell you, I'm going to the library, you will tell him, خير, الله ما قالوا خير, شلون في, شلون, مالك أخويا. Students go to the library 2 hours before the exam, right? I remember when I used to tell my students in the theories of architecture class, we need to go to the library. Why, doctor? Why? Are you okay? We are here in the class, so why you go to the library? Yeah. So we have to understand this. We have to understand the cultural context. And this is exactly the message that was delivered to M. Koolhaas. How to transform this library into a destination, a community destination. The idea started with a very simple composition coming from the paper and how the paper you can play with it, very similar to the impact of books and writings and lines. And then how also you start to consider different layers within the volume of the library, a layer which is so transparent, absorbing the community into the library, and also a more deeper layer. So this is the main entrance where it's so connected to the network of Education City, and literally a ramp will lead you and suddenly you are in the heart of the library. And once you are there, as I said, one half is so connected to the transparency of the context, everything is open and transparent. And the lower part with different material and different color is the place where you have the archivals and the historical books, as if the library itself is a dialogue between the past and the present. All the books are open, space is so fluid, but more importantly, you can eat, you can drink, you can laugh, and you can swing too, and you're still in the library. Absolutely wonderful space. And suddenly, this library is becoming a destination even more than shopping malls in Doha. Can you believe that? I talk to people and I would tell, where are you going with your kids? I'm going to Qatar National Library. Excuse me? Qatar National Library instead of going to the mosque? But because, as I said, the star architects was able to listen to the local voice, and he believed in what we said, that the library should transform into a community destination rather than a very rigid, disciplined place for people just to read. The museum. Another revolution is happening in museums. And again, this is so much related to our digital revolution and digital paradigm, because you can do a tour in any museum via even your iPhone. You can visit the Louvre with your iPhone. And therefore, a lot of museums now, they are doing what? They are transforming the museums into public spaces, into spaces for people to have fun, into spaces for people even to have picnics. This is the Tate Museum in London, where the landscaping and the urban setting of the surrounding of the museum is literally sucked into the museum, and then the main space of the museum is an extension of the outdoor spaces, and people can sit and have picnics and nobody would question you or ask anything about that. Very vibrant, positive social space. And this is something that is happening in Europe even from the 70s. This is the Pompidou Center, designed by Rogers and Piano, thank you, in 1977. And by the way, both of them, when they won this competition, both of them, they were 27 years old. And they did a revolution in the history of modern architecture, because they were able to have the gut to say, there is something called the credibility of the building. And this credibility is about exposing the building, transparency of the spaces, and how those spaces are connected to the outdoor plaza. And suddenly, the museum is not a place for the elite and the sophisticated. It's a place for the community. And this is very important change, very important paradigm shift in the role of the museum. Another star architect did the museum, Qatar National Museum. What was our reaction in the Middle East as professors and critics? شوية صحون مكسرة. Some broken plates. I heard that from top professors. What the hell is that? Why do you call him star architects? They paid all of this millions and billions for this guy to do. Well, a concept you go, maybe his wife punished him and he was washing the plates and then he was inspired by that. I'm not kidding. I've heard that. Even this image from a lecture by a professor, he was making fun of this museum. Now, my point is that I will never judge a place without a thorough investigation and knowing exactly the story of the project. So when you start to dig deep a bit, number one, you would realize something very interesting in the beginning of the design. And I've heard that from all the star architects that I've dealt with. In the Middle East and in the Gulf, they clean the sites for us. And when I asked, what do you mean by clean the site? They said they would send bulldozers and making the site so clean so we can do whatever we want. But we said, you are asked to design Qatar National Museum, which is a new chapter in the history of the country. So if the site has old chapters, your responsibility is to articulate this in your design. And therefore, the old palace was kept. And the new design, as you can see in the models, is articulated around this old center. So you see here in the study models, how the discussion was about how this old chapter of the history of the country should integrate and should speak to the new component. More importantly, those broken dishes are not broken dishes. This is part of the environment. This is part of the things that you can find while walking by the beach in Doha. So this is the desert road with this incredible formation that can inspire a lot of people to come up with spatial and design relationships. This is actually my hand in one of the workshops. Another very interesting issue, I don't know if you would notice that, but I'm the kind of person that would be excited also about how the building during construction is telling a story, is alerting us, is provoking our ideas, is inviting us to ask questions. And that's what is exactly happening in the case of this museum. People would ask a lot of questions. What's going on here? What kind of structure here? What kind of spaces that would come out of this? You see here also the idea of the urban setting of the museum. As I said, the museum is connected to the old part, but it's also connected to the different part of the city. And therefore, to emphasize the notion that the museum is not for the elite, it's not for the only rich and famous, it's not about having a one entrance from the museum, but the museum literally can be penetrated from different spaces. And then another interesting thing is the boundaries. How you treat the boundaries of the different compositions and the different masses in a sense that you will not really feel when you were in and when you were out, when you are in indoor spaces and galleries or coffee places or libraries and so on, and when you are enjoying the public spaces or semi-public spaces. And then emphasize the dialogue between the contemporary moment and the past. And therefore, it's not about segregation and divorce, it's about integration and continuity. So I want to end up with this case, with this picture where, 3 minutes? I would do that. With this picture where you see those different chapters that I'm talking about, the past, the contemporary, and even if you look at the metaphor of the water and the Gulf as if this is suggesting the future. So this is a very interesting triology. And then the mosque. It looks like a spaceship. It's not settled on the ground. It will fly, damn it. And in Arabic, one of the most important professors of Islamic architecture in the Middle East. He said, "Da جامع ده يخرب بيت أبوكو والله العظيم." And he was talking about this. And then he said, "My daughter said this is a fish." Professor of Islamic architecture, "This is a fish." And I said, just wait a minute, let's understand the place. Before talking about fish and before talking about يخرب بيت أبوكو, let's focus on the story of the project. The mosque in our contemporary time is becoming only a place for performing salah. All the mosques after salah. I wrote an article once saying the most unsustainable building on earth is mosque, because you open it only for 2.5 hours per day. Show me any other building where you open it only for 2.5 hours per day and you still claim that this is a sustainable mosque, this is a green mosque, because we don't deal with the mosque as it used to be. The cultural, the social, the political, the entertainment center of the community. And those people are doing that. They were even revisiting the concept of the kulliyah, the madrasa, and how the mosque can be a center of knowledge. This is the architectonics of the mosque, where all the typical elements are questioned. Do we still have a minaret, a typical minaret? No, because we don't have muazzin going up anymore. Do we have to have a typical dome that used to be done 200, 300 years ago? No, we don't have to, because it's more like symbolic, right? Spaces, outdoor and semi-indoor spaces where people, this is the main topic, the main function of the mosque, to bring people together, to allow them to talk and socialize and discuss Islamic issues together. The spirituality of the space. And we have here the top interior designers in Doha, in Bahrain. The spirituality is not about the typical elements that we saw when we go. Spirituality is about the design elements that you will insert in a place where whoever is praying would feel connected to Allah. And again, as I said, the notion of the minarets. You think deep and you read more, and you would realize that the overall structure of the mosque is based on 5 main components representing the 5 pillars of Islam, and each of those pillars, a calligraphy of the verses of Quran related to al-Siyam or al-Hajj or whatever, so very interesting symbolic ideas. All the components that will bring people to the place, the library, the coffee shop, the classes, the colleges, all of them are there. So the place is packed with people all the time. So to make a long story short, I would argue that number one, we need to reject freezing in the past. The past is fundamentally important. Our heritage is crucial. But we need to look at it as a platform to innovate and to create, not to be frozen in it. And I would also argue that it's our responsibility as designers to engage people and stimulate minds. This is the job of designers and architects and urban designers. And I would also argue that it's important to use designs and architecture as tools for inspiration and education. And the final point, talking about the mosque and the library and the museum, please don't judge before listening to the narrative. Thank you so much for having me.